Chapter 13 of The Silk-Stocking Murders by Anthony Berkeley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A very difficult case. With the departure of the doctor, the group round the divan broke up. The photographer was brought back, and, while Moresby and Inspector Tucker conferred in low tones nearby, Superintendent Green gave his orders. "See these marks," he said, exposing the backs of the dead girl's thighs again, but keeping the rest of the body covered. "I want as good a picture of them as you can get. Move the divan if the light's better for you from behind, but put it back again in the same place. You can go and get the plates developed after that. There are no other marks on the body." He joined Moresby and Tucker. "As the doctor said, I don't suppose they're of any importance, those marks," he observed, "but we'd better have a record of them, just in case." "If he can get one," agreed Moresby. "Not an easy thing to photograph." They went on talking. Roger strolled across the room and examined the door. He had already noticed that there were no scratches on the lower part, such as might have been made by a pair of high-heeled shoes struggling desperately, as had been the case with Janet Manners. He now saw that there were no marks on the upper part either, which bore out the doctor's statement that nothing was to be learnt from the girl's nails. Evidently poor little Dorothy Fielder had died peacefully, at any rate, which neither Janet nor, as he had heard since, Elsie Benham had done. In front of the door, lying on its back with the top rail towards the doorway, was still the overturned chair. Roger looked at it closely, but could not see that anything was to be learnt from it. The chair was of the low-seated, high-backed prie-dieu type, with a molded wooden rail at the top of the back. In fact, the seat was so low that Roger was a little surprised that it had proved adequate for its purpose. The surface was only about a foot above the casters, and unless the girl had been standing on it on tiptoes, he would have expected the stocking to stretch far enough to enable her to get her toes on the ground. Then he remembered that the chair was, after all, merely part of the stage setting for suicide and had no other importance. But it was curious, nevertheless, that the murderer, so very much on the spot in all other respects, should have chosen the one chair in the room which suited his purpose least. He turned away and saw the assistant commissioner approaching him. "You're Sheringham, aren't you?" said Sir Paul pleasantly, holding out his hand. "I must apologize for not speaking to you before, but things have been so busy. My predecessor told me about that brilliant piece of work of yours down at Witchford. Well, what do you feel about all this?" "That I oughtn't to be here," Roger replied promptly. "I never felt so insignificant in my life." "Oh, we're all insignificant cogs in the same big wheel, if it comes to that," laughed the other. He swept a glance round the room, and his eyes grew grave again as they rested on the dead girl. "This is really an appalling business, isn't it?" he said soberly. "Assuming, I mean, that it really is murder. It's the first big case I've had since my appointment, of course, and candidly, I don't like it at all. And there's going to be some fur flying when the papers get hold of it, of course, if we can't lay our hands on the man. Do you remember what they had said about us at the time of Jack the Ripper?" "Yes, but it wasn't Scotland Yard's fault. They had nothing to work on." "Nor have we now," responded Sir Paul ruefully. "We haven't unearthed a single fresh clue here yet. The man must be a criminal genius, not a sign of fingerprint even." "It's the devil," muttered Roger. "It certainly is," agreed the assistant commissioner with gloom. "And so is he." They watched the others for a few moments in silence. The room was getting emptier now. The photographer had gone, and so had the divisional inspector to give orders to his men about keeping the approaches to the flat guarded and the removal of the body. The fingerprint man had returned and continued to prowl, but his face had quite lost its hopeful expression. Moresby and the superintendent were still conferring in a corner. "And I was having lunch at my club when it happened," Roger muttered. "Hell, with Plato, by the way. Lady Ursula's fiancé, you remember." "Yes, I know him slightly. He'll be smelling a rat soon." "He's smelt it already." The assistant commissioner sighed. "We can't keep it out of the papers much longer." They fell into silence again. And there are no signs of a struggle at all this time, Roger mused. It's curious. None in the room, as you can see, and so far as the doctor could find, none on the body. He's going to carry out an autopsy, but I can't see how that can add anything to our knowledge. The cause of death is obvious enough, even to our lay eyes. And no bruises at the wrists. Apparently not even that, nor the ankles. Roger ruminated. Lady Ursula's wrists were faintly bruised, weren't they? Yes, I remember they were. And her ankles, too? Yes, very slightly. She'd evidently been bound, if that's what you mean. And this girl hadn't. That's odd, or with something that didn't mark, at any rate. I don't suppose he used exactly the same methods every time, said the assistant commissioner. The other two girls' wrists weren't bruised, did you know? No, I didn't. Moresby told me they were going to be examined. Yes, I got the report this morning. No bruises on the bodies of either of them. In other words, apparently no struggle. Yes, Superintendent? Superintendent Green had approached. He nodded slightly to Roger as if to convey that though they were only just acquainted, he knew enough about him not to resent his presence, but it was not a very cordial nod. I'm afraid this case isn't going to help us much, sir, he said. Moresby and I can't find a blessed thing. This man knows his job all right, but it's none of our regulars, I'll swear. No, agreed Sir Paul. I never thought it was. Well, you and Moresby had better go over the ground again, just to make sure you've missed nothing. We've simply got to get this fellow somehow, you know, now that the absence of fingerprints on that book does seem to point definitely to his existence at last. The superintendent seemed a trifle hurt. It was clear that he did not like the suggestion that he might have missed something. Roger was inclined to agree with him. The superintendent looked as if he would miss very little. And the papers will be on to us now, I expect, Sir Paul added unhappily. I wonder we haven't had any journalists nosing round here already. The superintendent glanced at Roger as if not quite sure that one was not here already. What are we to tell them if they do come, sir? He asked. We don't want to scare our bird by letting them tell him that we're on his tail. No, certainly not. You'd better have a chit sent round the various editors asking them not to comment on the case, I think. You can just say tactfully that Scotland Yard isn't altogether satisfied, but doesn't want any public interest roused pending their investigations. You know, the usual sort of thing. Yes, sir, I'll see to it. And by the way, Superintendent, what about another line of approach? This man's obviously mad, as Moresby says. I think you'd better have inquiries made as to any homicidal maniacs at large for the last couple of months. Yes, sir, we can do that, of course, admitted the superintendent a little condescendingly. But I think if you or I were to meet him, not knowing who he was, we'd no more guess he was mad than we should each other. That's just what I've been saying all the time, Roger put in. Is that so, Mr. Sheringham? Said the superintendent very politely, but without the least interest, and turned back to Moresby. The assistant commissioner smothered a smile. He knew his Superintendent Green. Well, Sheringham, he said, we can't do much more here. Come along to my club and have a cup of tea. I'd like to have a chat with you about the case and hear what you think of it so far. Thanks, Roger replied. I'd like to. Roger never refused an invitation to talk. As they passed out onto the stone landing, Sir Paul jerked his head backwards. There's that other girl, of course, but we'll let those two question her. It's their business, and they do it better than us, and too many of us would probably confuse her. She's half hysterical as it is, but I don't anticipate the slightest information from her. Hi-ho, this really is a perfectly damnable case. They got into a taxi and were driven to Pall Mall. Finding a secluded table in a corner of the big lounge, Sir Paul ordered tea, and they settled down. Roger described how his suspicions had been first aroused and detailed the various conclusions at which he had arrived. Sir Paul was an admirable listener. Roger went on to express his doubts as to the advisability of pinning everything to the clue of the notepaper, but here Sir Paul was not in agreement. After all, he pointed out, exactly as Moresby had done, it's the only real clue we've got, you know. It must be followed up to the limit. I've a feeling, said Roger, that this case isn't going to be solved by your ordinary methods. The clue isn't strong enough. It was the same with Jack the Ripper, you remember. I always have thought that the French way of approach might have produced results there. We've got to stick to our own ways, returned Sir Paul. The British public would never stand for anything else. Look what a fuss there was not long ago about taking a suspect's fingerprints. The man had nothing to lose by it if he was innocent, and possibly plenty to gain. But the great British public thought it was an infringement of their liberty, and the papers talked a lot of nonsense about un-English methods, so that now our hands are tied, and we're not allowed to do even a small thing like that. No, Sheringham, it's no good telling me to change our ways, even to catch a murderer. The British public would rather have all its murderers uncaught than change anything in the means of catching them. Surely you ought to know that. It was evidently a subject on which Sir Paul felt rather strongly. I suppose there's a good deal in that, Roger had to admit. There's everything, said Sir Paul with feeling. Besides, you must remember that a British jury, too, isn't the same as a French jury. Only definite evidence carries any weight with a British jury. A Frenchman takes a pleasure in clever reasoning, but the Britisher doesn't care a hang for it. You can try to dazzle him with brilliant reasoning and the most cunning deductions and prove your case on those lines to the hilt, but unless it rests on a firm basis of solid facts, your British jury won't even blink. It's unanswerable facts that we've got to lay before our courts of law, not just cleverness. Yes, Roger had to agree. Moresby's always rubbing into me the difference between being sure of your man and proving your case against him sufficiently to satisfy the law. And he seems to think that when we've found our man, we're going to have a good deal of difficulty in proving things against him in these cases. I'll bet we are, Sir Paul concurred gloomily. The beggar simply won't leave us anything to fasten our proof onto. Just look at this last case. Except for that one bit of negative evidence about the lack of fingerprints on the book, which may convince us, but wouldn't necessarily convince a jury at all, except for that, there simply isn't anything to prove that it isn't suicide. We know it can't be suicide, but how on earth are we going to prove merely that it's murder at all without even considering the case to be made out against any one man? Oh, we're up badly against it here. We certainly are, said Roger, and registered his silent conviction yet again that, as the case stood at present, ordinary police methods would never secure a conviction. And if that really were so, what was he going to do about it? The answer, to Roger, was obvious. Scotland Yard might be hampered. He, on the other hand, was not. They dropped into a desultory discussion of the crime in its relation to criminology in general, of which Sir Paul, like Roger, was an eager student. It's almost perfect, Sir Paul said, lighting a fresh cigarette. So far as one can see, there isn't a flaw. It's the almost perfect crime, and it takes a madman to do it. There's a nice comment on the professional criminal. Almost perfect, Roger echoed. Why not quite perfect? Surely the quite perfect crime, Sir Paul smiled, is the one that never gets suspected of being a crime at all. The point is yours, yes. By the way, you've noticed, of course, how few of these lust murderers ever do get found out. Well, naturally, unless they deliberately give themselves away, like Neil Cream did, there's simply nothing to go on, no starting point for inquiry at all. In other words, no motive that's going to lead anywhere. After all, it's motive that really puts a man in the dock in 9 cases out of 10. Motive and opportunity together make a professional detective carol with joy. He knows he's got his man all right then. I suppose it's because I'm an amateur, Roger sighed, but I must say I do like quick results. It frets me to have to sit quiet while this brute murders half a dozen more unfortunate girls before we can get our hands on him, as no doubt he will. But you must realize the immense amount of patient research work that a case of this sort requires, Sheringham, before an arrest can be made. Stupendous! Why, do you realize that it took Superintendent Neal nearly a whole year's hard work to establish his case against Smith, the brides in the bath man, as the newspapers christened him? Roger nodded. Yes, I know, but for all that, delay irks me horribly. I'm afraid I shouldn't have made a good professional detective at all. Look here, are you going back to Gray's Inn Road? Meaning you're itching to get back there yourself? Frankly, I am. They ought to be through with the examination of the other girl, and I'm very anxious to hear whether they found out anything from her. And then there are all the other inquiries, whether anybody saw him come in or leave, and all that sort of thing. I suppose they've got all that in hand? Oh, yes, Tucker will have seen to that. That's just routine work, of course. Well, you get along if you want to, Sheringham. I can't come with you, I'm afraid. I must be getting back to the yard myself. And I say, Sir Paul, Roger added very earnestly, I don't want to butt in or make a nuisance of myself, but if you could arrange for any information about these crimes that happens to come in to be telephoned on to me at my flat, I should be most awfully grateful. Do you think it could be done? Sir Paul smiled. I think it might, he said. Roger's voluble thanks were cut short by a club attendant who interposed to tell Sir Paul that he was wanted on the telephone. He excused himself, and Roger accompanied him as far as the hall, where they parted company, Roger to retrieve his hat and coat. He had conceived a shrewd suspicion that his removal from the flat was not accident, but design, to leave the official portion of the investigation to perform its routine work unoverlooked by its unofficial colleague. If that were so, he considered that the others had had quite enough time to themselves by now, and his return could not be resented. And even if it were, Roger would not be so overcome with grief as to hurry away at once. He was just going down the steps outside the club when he heard his name called. Sir Paul was standing in the doorway beckoning. Roger turned and ran back to join him. "You've had some news," he declared. Sir Paul nodded. "The first bit of luck yet," he said, in a voice that could not be overheard by the porter. "I thought you might like to know. Moresby's just telephoned through that he's been able to get hold of a really good description of the man we want." "Joy on earth and mercy mild!" exclaimed Roger in high delight, and fled off to catch a passing taxi. End of chapter 13.